The metal corridors of the starbound horizon hummed with the constant vibration of engines pushing through deep space. Staff Sergeant Kyle Bennett walked his usual route through the detention section, his boots echoing against the floor plates. He had been doing this job for 3 months now, ever since the ship picked up its current cargo of Xantharian prisoners. Kyle didn't particularly enjoy guard duty. He was a Marine, trained for combat, not babysitting enemy captives. But orders were orders, and someone had to do it. The Xantharians were being transported to Sanctuary Station for a prisoner exchange, a routine operation that happened every few months as part of the ongoing war between their species. The Xantharians were terrifying to look at, even behind force fields. They stood over 7 feet tall, with hard shell-like skin that could stop small arms fire. Their bodies had 4 arms instead of 2, and their faces were distinctly insect-like with compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Humanity had been fighting them for 15 years over territory in this sector of space, and the war had created deep hatred on both sides. Kyle stopped at Cell 7, where Commander Virith was held with her offspring. The Xantharians called their young spawn, which sounded harsh to human ears, but Kyle had learned it was just their word for children. The little one was named Chicks, and unlike the adults, Chicks looked fragile and scared. The young Xantharian was only about 4 feet tall with softer plating that hadn't fully hardened yet. Virith watched Kyle with those strange, compound eyes. She never spoke to the guards, never caused trouble, just kept her child close and waited. Kyle nodded respectfully as he passed, a gesture he knew she probably didn't understand, but it felt right anyway. His shift was supposed to end in 20 minutes. He was looking forward to getting some food and maybe catching up on messages from his sister back on Earth. But as he reached the end of the corridor and prepared to hand over to the next watch, he heard voices raised in anger. Kyle turned back and saw 3 guards at Cell 7. Private First Class Aaron Hunt was in the lead, with Corporal Lewis Grant and Specialist Nina Webb backing him up. Kyle's stomach tightened. Aaron had a reputation, and it wasn't a good one. Aaron had lost his entire family when Xantharian raiders hit his colony world 6 years ago. His parents, 2 brothers, and a baby sister all died in the attack. Aaron survived only because he was off-world at the time, visiting his aunt. The tragedy had twisted something inside him. He volunteered for prisoner duty specifically to make captured Xantharians suffer. Kyle walked back toward Cell 7, trying to keep his expression neutral. The regulations were clear about prisoner treatment. Captives were to be held securely but without unnecessary cruelty. However, regulations and reality didn't always match up, especially when officers weren't watching closely. Aaron was banging his shock prod against the force field, making it flicker and spark. The sound was loud and harsh, designed to frighten. Chicks had pressed back against the far wall of the cell, trembling. Virith had positioned herself between her child and the barrier, ready to protect despite knowing the force field prevented physical contact. "Come on, Bugface," Aaron was saying, his voice thick with venom. "Don't you want to try something? Or are you only brave when you're burning down colonies?" Lewis and Nina looked uncomfortable but said nothing. They were followers, not leaders, and Aaron's grief gave him a kind of terrible authority that made others hesitant to challenge him. Kyle approached the group. "Hunt, what's going on here?" Aaron glanced back, his eyes hard. "Just checking on our guests, Sergeant. Making sure they're comfortable. Looks like you're harassing them to me. Move along." "With respect, Sergeant, my shift just started. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Kyle's jaw tightened. Aaron was technically correct. This was his assigned post for the next 4 hours. "Then do your job properly. The regulations say we treat prisoners according to the Articles of War." Aaron's expression darkened. The Articles of War. Right. Did these bugs follow the Articles of War when they killed my family? Did they think about regulations when they burned down my home? Kyle understood the pain behind those words. He really did. He had lost friends in this war too. Every human in uniform had lost someone. But that didn't make this right. "I'm sorry about your family, Aaron. I truly am. But this isn't how we honor them. This isn't who we are." "Who we are." Aaron's voice rose. "We're at war, Sergeant. These things are the enemy." Before Kyle could respond, something happened that changed everything. Chicks, trying to move further away from the noise and Aaron's threats, stumbled against a small shelf in the cell. A piece, a fruit, part of the prisoner's rations, rolled off and fell. It bounced once and rolled under the force field barrier, coming to rest just outside the cell. The young Xantharian looked at the fruit, then at its mother. Virith made a clicking sound, probably telling her child to leave it. But Chicks was young and hungry and scared. The little one reached a small arm through the narrow gap at the bottom of the force field, trying to retrieve the fruit. Aaron saw the opportunity, his face twisted with rage and old grief. He raised his shock prod and moved to strike the exposed limb. Kyle didn't think. There wasn't time for thinking. He just moved, throwing himself between Aaron and the cell. The shock prod came down and connected with Kyle's torso instead of the child's arm. Electricity flooded through Kyle's body. Every muscle seized at once. Pain like nothing he had ever felt exploded through his nervous system. He couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but endure as the current tore through him. Aaron, lost in his rage and grief, didn't stop. He struck again and again. Kyle felt ribs crack. He tasted blood. His vision started to go dark around the edges. Through the pain and the fading consciousness, Kyle was dimly aware of voices. Nina was screaming for Aaron to stop. Lewis was trying to pull Aaron back. Alarms were sounding. Boots were running down the corridor. The last thing Kyle saw before darkness took him completely was Vireth's face pressed against the force field, her compound eyes fixed on him with an expression he couldn't read, but somehow understood. She had witnessed everything. She had seen him sacrifice himself to protect her child. Then Lieutenant Commander Susan Palmer arrived with the Master-at-Arms and 4 security personnel. Aaron was pulled away and restrained. Medics rushed in with a stretcher. Kyle was lifted carefully, his body still twitching from electrical shock, blood pooling beneath him. As they carried Kyle away, Virith remained at the barrier, watching. She raised her 4 arms in a gesture that meant nothing to the humans present, but everything in Xantharian culture. It was the gesture of profound debt, of recognition that a life had been offered for a life. Chicks huddled against her mother, crying in the chittering ways Xantharians expressed distress. Virith stroked her child's head with one limb while keeping, her eyes fixed on the corridor where Kyle had disappeared. Something had changed in that moment. Something that neither species had words for yet. A bridge had begun to form between 2 worlds, built on the foundation of one man's choice to protect a child, even if that child belonged to the enemy. Kyle woke up 3 days later in the medical bay of the Starbound Horizon. His entire body felt like it was on fire. Every breath sent sharp pains through his chest where ribs had been broken. His skin felt raw and sensitive where the electrical burns had scorched him, but he was alive, and according to the monitors beeping around him, he was going to stay that way. Lieutenant Peter Cole, the ship's doctor, was the first person Kyle saw clearly. Peter was a middle-aged man with graying hair and the calm demeanor that came from years of putting injured people back together. "Welcome back, Sergeant Bennett," Peter said, checking the displays above Kyle's bed. "You gave us quite a scare. 3 broken ribs, second-degree electrical burns across 40% of your body, internal bleeding, and a severe concussion. You're lucky to be alive." Kyle tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Peter held up a cup with a straw, helping him take small sips of water. After a moment, Kyle managed to croak out, "The child, Chicks, is the kid okay?" Peter smiled slightly. "The Xantharian youngling is fine. Thanks to you. You took the beating that was meant for it." The memories came flooding back. Aaron's rage, the shock prod coming down, making the split-second choice to step between the weapon and a scared child. Kyle closed his eyes, processing it all. "Hunt?" Kyle asked. "What happened to Aaron?" "In the brig, awaiting court-martial. He's facing serious charges, including assault on a superior officer, attempted harm of a prisoner of war, and conduct unbecoming. Lewis Grant and Nina Webb are also facing charges, though lesser ones since they didn't actually participate in the assault." Kyle felt a complicated mix of emotions about that. Aaron had done wrong, absolutely, but Kyle understood the pain that drove him. "His family," Kyle said quietly. He lost everyone in a raid. Peter nodded. I know his story. A lot of people know it. That's why opinion on this ship is divided about what you did. Divided? The doctor pulled up a chair and sat down. Kyle, what you did has become the talk of the entire ship. The security footage has been seen by everyone. Some people think you're a hero who upheld our values even toward enemies. Others think you betrayed your own kind by protecting enemy combatants. Kyle hadn't thought about it in those terms. He hadn't thought at all, really. He just saw a child in danger and acted on instinct. Over the next few days, Kyle learned just how controversial his actions had become. Crew members visited him with wildly different reactions. Some shook his hand and thanked him for showing that humans could be better than the war demanded. Others gave him cold looks and made comments about where his loyalties lay. His younger sister Claire sent a message from Earth. She was proud of him, she said, but also worried. The incident had made news back home, and she was getting questions from her friends at university. Some people were calling Kyle a traitor in the media. Captain Richard Stone visited on Kyle's 5th day in medical. The captain was a veteran of 27 years, a man who had fought in the early days of the war and lost his left arm in combat. He had a prosthetic replacement now, but everyone knew his story. Sergeant Bennett, the captain said, standing at attention beside Kyle's bed. I want you to know that I've reviewed the footage and the reports. What you did was against protocol. You interfered with another guard's duties and put yourself in harm's way unnecessarily. Kyle's heart sank. He was going to be punished after all. But then Captain Stone's stern expression softened slightly. However, I also believe you demonstrated the kind of moral courage that makes me proud to serve alongside you. You saw a child about to be hurt and you stopped it. The fact that the child was Zintharian doesn't change the fundamental decency of that action. You have my respect, Sergeant. The captain saluted, a formal gesture of honor, and Kyle tried to return it despite the pain. But the captain's visit wasn't just a courtesy call. There's something else you need to know, Stone said. Commander Vereth has requested to see you. She's asked for it multiple times, actually. It's an unusual request, and frankly, we're not sure what to make of it. Kyle's chest tightened, and not from his injuries. She wants to see me? Why? That's what we'd like to find out. Commander Susan Palmer and I have discussed it extensively. This could be an intelligence-gathering operation, a setup for propaganda purposes, or even an assassination attempt. But it could also be genuine. Vereth has been different since the incident. Quieter, more thoughtful. Our liaisons say she's refused food for days, which is apparently unusual for Zintharians. You want me to meet with her? Kyle said slowly. Only if you're willing. And only under strict security protocols. We'll have guards present, weapons ready, and you'll be monitored the entire time. If anything seems wrong, we'll end it immediately. Kyle thought about Vereth's face pressed against the force field, watching as he was carried away. He thought about the gesture she had made with her forearms. There had been something in her expression, something that transcended species and war. I'll do it, Kyle said. 2 days later, Kyle was transported in a wheelchair to a secure meeting room. His body was healing, but he still couldn't walk far without pain. The room was small and sparse, with a table in the center and chairs on both sides. Human guards stood at every entrance, weapons visible. Vereth was brought in, her forearms restrained but not cruelly. Chicks walked beside her, chirping nervously. The young Zintharian had grown slightly in the weeks since Kyle had last seen them, and seemed less frightened than before. Through a translator device sitting on the table, Vereth's clicking and humming voice was converted into English. The translation was mechanical and sometimes awkward, but the meaning came through clearly. Kyle Bennett, Vereth began, her compound eyes fixed on him. You have done something I did not believe possible. You protected my offspring at great cost to yourself. In my culture, this is called Kethva. It is the most sacred bond that can exist between beings. Kyle listened, fascinated despite himself. Kethva is a life debt, Vereth continued. When one person sacrifices themselves to save another's child, they become bound in a way that transcends all other loyalties. It is stronger than clan ties, stronger than military duty, stronger even than the bonds of mating. You saved Chix's life, perhaps even saved Chix from torture. By our laws and customs, I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. I didn't do it expecting anything, Kyle said. I just couldn't stand by and watch a child get hurt. I understand this now, Vereth said. That is what makes it Kethva. You expected no reward, no benefit. You simply acted because your nature demanded it. This tells me something important about humans, something I have never seen before in this war. Chick spoke up then, the translator rendering the youngling's voice as high-pitched and eager. You saved me. I was scared and you stopped the bad human. Thank you, Kyle Bennett. Kyle felt his throat tighten with emotion. Hearing gratitude from a child, even an alien child from an enemy species, touched something deep inside him. Vireth performed the same gesture she had made before, crossing all four arms over her thorax in an X pattern. By the ancient laws of my people, I declare Kethva with Kyle Bennett. My life, my honor, and my service are pledged to you. Should you ever need me for any reason, I will answer. This bond cannot be broken by war, by distance, or by death. It is eternal. The humans in the room looked at each other uncertainly. This was clearly significant, but none of them fully understood what it meant for their military situation or the political implications. Before the guards could escort Vireth back to her cell, she reached up with one arm and removed a crystalline pendant that hung around her neck. It glowed faintly with a soft blue light, some kind of bioluminescence that Xantharians were known to possess. She held it out to Kyle. This is my family talisman. It has been passed down through 17 generations of my lineage. I give it to you as proof of Kethva, as symbol of the debt I can never repay. Kyle took the pendant with trembling hands. It was warm to the touch and surprisingly light. The crystal seemed to pulse gently as if alive. Thank you, he said simply, not knowing what else to say. As Vireth and Chix were led away, the young Xantharian looked back and waved one small arm. Kyle waved back, a simple gesture of connection across the vast gulf between their species. After they left, Captain Stone looked at the pendant in Kyle's hand. That's going to need to be analyzed by intelligence. It could have tracking devices or other technology embedded in it. It's just a family heirloom, Kyle said, though he handed it over. She gave me something precious to her people. That means something. Maybe, Stone said. Or maybe it's a very sophisticated intelligence operation. Either way, Sergeant, your life just got a lot more complicated. Kyle looked at the door where Vireth had exited. The Xantharian commander had looked at him with what he could only describe as profound respect, mixed with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding between enemies. Whatever Kethva truly meant, Kyle sensed that this was only the beginning of something much larger than himself. 2 weeks after his meeting with Vireth, Kyle was cleared for light duty. His ribs still ached when he moved wrong, and the electrical burns had left pale scars across his skin. But Lieutenant Peter Cole declared him fit enough to return to work. Kyle was grateful. Lying in medical bay gave him too much time to think about things he couldn't control. The Starbound horizon was approaching Sanctuary Station, a massive neutral facility that floated in unclaimed space between human and Xantharian territories. The station was maintained by the Terran Xantharian Peace Monitoring Committee, an organization that existed mostly on paper. It had failed to negotiate any lasting peace in 15 years of war, but it did serve one useful purpose. It provided a place where prisoner exchanges could happen without either side having to enter enemy space. Kyle had been assigned to the honor guard for the exchange ceremony. It was supposed to be a simple duty: stand at attention, look professional, and maintain security while the prisoners were transferred. But Kyle knew this exchange would be different. Vireth and Chix would be among those released. The morning of the exchange, Kyle put on his dress uniform carefully. The formal blue jacket felt tight across his still healing ribs, but he made sure every detail was perfect. Whatever was about to happen, he wanted to face it properly. Commander Susan Palmer briefed the honor guard before they disembarked. She was a strict officer with high standards, and she made clear that any deviation from protocol would result in severe consequences. Everyone was to remain professional and disciplined. The eyes of both governments would be on this exchange. The political situation is delicate, Palmer said, looking directly at Kyle. Some of our prisoners have developed unusual connections with their guards. We need to ensure those connections don't create incidents during the transfer. Kyle understood. She was talking about him and Vireth. Sanctuary Station was enormous, a ring-shaped structure that rotated to create artificial gravity. The docking bay where the exchange would occur was in the central hub, a vast space that could accommodate ships from dozens of different species. When the Starbound horizon docked, Kyle could see the Zintharian vessel on the opposite side of the bay. It was a massive warship called the Shard of Honor, its hull covered in the same chitinous armor that protected Zintharian bodies. The exchange was conducted with rigid formality. Human and Zintharian delegations assembled on opposite sides of the bay, maintaining a distance of exactly 100 meters as specified by protocol. Between them was a neutral zone monitored by station security. The prisoners would walk through the neutral zone one at a time, processed through scanning equipment to ensure no weapons or contraband were being transferred. It was a slow process designed to prevent any tricks or violence. Kyle stood at attention with the other members of the honor guard, trying to keep his face neutral. But his eyes searched the Zintharian prisoners as they lined up for processing. There were 23 of them total, all warriors who had been captured in various engagements over the past year. Then he saw them. Virith stood tall and proud despite her weeks in captivity, her forearms finally free of restraints. Chick stayed close to her side, looking around the vast docking bay with the wide-eyed curiosity of youth. The processing began. One by one, prisoners walked through the scanners and crossed into the waiting arms of their own people. The humans who had been held by the Zintharians looked thin and tired but alive. The Zintharians walked with military precision, refusing to show any weakness even after months of imprisonment. Virith was 15th in line. As she approached the scanner, Kyle's heart began to pound. He didn't know what to expect. Would she just walk past like the others? Or would something happen? She passed through the scanner without incident. The equipment confirmed she carried no weapons or forbidden technology. She was cleared to cross. Chicks went through next, the young Zintharian chirping nervously as the machines hummed around them. They began walking toward the Zintharian side. Kyle watched, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. It was over. They would return to their people, and he would probably never see them again. That was for the best, really. They were enemies, after all. But then Virith stopped. Right in the middle of the neutral zone, she stopped walking and turned around. The entire docking bay seemed to hold its breath. This was not protocol. Stopping in the neutral zone was forbidden. Station security officers tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Commander Palmer's face went pale. Virith walked back toward the human side. She walked straight toward Kyle. Zintharian guards hissed in alarm. Human soldiers tensed, ready to intervene if this was some kind of attack. Captain Stone raised one hand, signaling everyone to hold position but be ready. Virith stopped directly in front of Kyle. They were close enough that he could see his reflection in her compound eyes. Up close, he could see patterns in her chitinous plating that he hadn't noticed before. Swirls of darker color that might have been beautiful if he could have looked past seeing her as the enemy. She reached up with one arm and removed the same type of crystalline pendant from around her neck that she had tried to give Kyle before. Intelligence had analyzed the first one thoroughly and found nothing but what Virith claimed. A family heirloom with no technology embedded. They had returned it to her before the exchange. Virith held the pendant out to Kyle, speaking in her own language. Her voice was loud enough that everyone in the docking bay could hear. The translation came through speakers mounted throughout the bay, courtesy of the station's systems. Kyle Bennett, you carry my family's honor in your heart. I give you this symbol so that all may know of the Kethva between us. The debt I owe you transcends this war. Should you ever need me, speak my name and I will come. Kyle took the pendant, his hand trembling slightly. It was warm, just like the first one had been. The blue glow pulsed in time with what might have been Virith's heartbeat. Then Virith did something completely unexpected. She spoke in English, words she had clearly practiced but which came out awkward and heavily accented. You honor-bound. Virith see Kyle Bennett. Virith remember always. Chick stepped forward then, the young Zintharian having followed its mother back across the neutral zone. In much better English than Virith had managed, Chick said, "Thank you, friend Kyle, you saved me. I will never forget." The child held up a small carved stone, offering it to Kyle with both primary arms. The stone had been shaped into a spiral pattern, smooth and polished. It was clearly handmade, worked over many hours. "I made this for you," Chick said, "so you remember me too." Kyle knelt down, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and accepted the stone with the reverence it deserved. "I could never forget you, Chicks. Be safe. Grow strong." The young Zintharian chirped happily, then did something that made every human in the docking bay gasp. Chicks hugged Kyle, wrapping small arms around his neck in a gesture that was unmistakably affectionate despite coming from an alien species. Kyle hugged back, careful not to squeeze too hard. When Chix pulled away, the child was making a sound that the translator identified as Zintharian laughter. Virith gestured for her offspring to follow, and together they walked back toward the Zintharian side. But before they crossed the boundary, Virith turned one last time. She raised all four arms in that X-pattern gesture, holding it for a long moment. Then she spoke one more time in English, this not end, this beginning. The Zintharian delegation received them with what looked like confusion and respect mixed together. The massive warrior who appeared to be their commander, a male easily 8 feet tall with battle scars across his armor plating, looked at Kyle and gave a single slow nod of acknowledgement. Then the Zintharians withdrew to their ship, and the humans did the same. On the journey back to the starbound horizon, Kyle sat in the transport shuttle holding two precious items, a glowing crystal pendant and a hand-carved stone. Around him, the other soldiers were silent. No one knew quite what to say about what had just happened. Commander Palmer sat down next to Kyle. Her earlier sternness had faded into something more thoughtful. "That was the most unusual exchange I've witnessed in my career," she said quietly. "You made quite an impression on Commander Virith." "She made an impression on me too," Kyle admitted. "The intelligence community is going to want to debrief you extensively. What happened out there will be analyzed and discussed at the highest levels. You understand that, right?" Kyle nodded. He understood that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. But as he looked down at the stone Chix had made for him, worn smooth by small alien hands, he couldn't bring himself to regret what had happened. He had protected a child, and somehow, impossibly, that simple act had created a connection that transcended the war between their peoples. Captain Stone appeared in the doorway of the shuttle. "Sergeant Bennett, when we return to the ship, you're to report to my office. We have a lot to discuss." "Yes, sir." Stone's expression was unreadable, but his voice held a note of something that might have been approval. "What you did today, stepping between that shock prod and the Zintharian youngling, has had ripples. Those ripples are spreading further than you know. The question now is whether those ripples will become waves, and if so, what kind of waves they'll be." 4 months passed after the exchange at Sanctuary Station. Kyle tried to return to normal life aboard the starbound horizon, but nothing felt normal anymore. The intelligence debriefings had been intense and exhausting, with analysts asking the same questions in different ways, trying to determine if Virith's actions were genuine or part of some elaborate Zintharian plot. Kyle told them the truth over and over. He believed Virith was sincere. He believed the life debt she spoke of was real in her culture. But he also admitted he couldn't be certain. How could anyone truly know what an alien was thinking? The pendant and the carved stone had both been analyzed thoroughly. The pendant was exactly what Virith claimed, a piece of crystal infused with Zintharian bioluminescent compounds. No tracking devices, no hidden technology, just a family heirloom. The stone was similarly innocent, just polished rock carved by young hands. After the analyst finished with them, both items were returned to Kyle. He kept them in a small box in his quarters, taking them out sometimes to look at when he was alone. The pendant still glowed softly, and the stone still fit perfectly in his palm. They were reminders of something he couldn't quite name. The ship had been assigned to patrol duty in a quiet sector, escorting supply vessels and watching for Zintharian raiders. It was boring work, which Kyle appreciated after the chaos of the past months. He needed time to process everything that had happened. His sister Claire sent regular messages from Earth. She told him about her studies, about protests on campus both for and against the war, about how some people called him a hero, while others called him a traitor. Kyle tried not to think about his sudden fame or infamy, depending on who was talking. The ship docked at Olympus Station for resupply and crew rotation. Kyle was granted shore leave for the first time in months. He planned to do nothing more exciting than eat real food instead of ship rations and maybe watch a movie in one of the station's entertainment centers. He was 2 hours into his leave, sitting in a small cafe enjoying actual coffee, when his communicator buzzed. The message was marked urgent and came from Captain Stone himself. Sergeant Bennett returned to the ship immediately. Personal matter, not disciplinary. Kyle paid for his coffee and hurried back through the station corridors. When he arrived at the starbound horizon, a crew member directed him to a private conference room rather than the captain's office. That was unusual. Inside, Captain Stone was waiting along with Commander Susan Palmer and a woman Kyle didn't recognize. She wore a civilian suit rather than a military uniform, and her badge identified her as part of the diplomatic corps. "Sergeant Bennett," Stone said, gesturing to a chair. "This is Ambassador Patricia Morgan. She's here about a communication we received 3 hours ago." Kyle sat down, confused. "A communication?" Ambassador Morgan leaned forward. She was in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that had probably seen every trick in the diplomatic playbook. "A message came through back channels that we normally use for quiet negotiations between governments. It was encrypted with codes that only high-level Zintharian officials should have access to. And it was addressed specifically to you." Kyle's heart began to pound. "To me, from who?" "Commander Virith," Palmer said, bringing up a display on the room's main screen. "She's been trying to reach you for weeks, apparently. The message was routed through several intermediaries before reaching us, which is why it took so long." The screen showed text that had been translated from Zintharian clicking and humming into English. Kyle read it slowly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. The message began with formal greetings in Zintharian custom, then shifted into something more personal. Virith explained that after returning to her people, she had faced serious consequences for declaring Kethva with a human. She had been removed from military command. Her actions were viewed as shameful by hardline factions within Zintharian society, who believed showing any respect to humans was weakness. But Virith wrote that she did not regret her choice. Kethva was sacred, more important than career or social standing. Kyle had shown her something she had never expected to see from a human: genuine compassion for a child who was supposed to be his enemy. Since returning home, Virith had been studying human culture obsessively. She had accessed every piece of human media and literature that Zintharian intelligence had collected over the years of war. She was trying to understand the species that had produced someone like Kyle. The more she learned, the more she realized that both sides had been fed propaganda. Humans were not the honorless predators that Zintharian military training claimed, and she suspected that Zintharians were not the mindless monsters that human propaganda made them out to be. Virith proposed something radical. She wanted to establish a direct dialogue with Kyle, human to Zintharian outside official government channels. She wanted to share information about her people, their culture, their reasons for fighting, their hopes and fears, and she wanted to learn the same about humans. She believed, she wrote, that if individuals could understand each other, perhaps their peoples could too. The official peace talks had failed for 15 years. Maybe it was time to try something different. Something that started with two people who had already proven they could see past the war. Kyle finished reading and looked up at the 3 officers watching him. "She wants to talk about peace, or she wants to gather intelligence," Palmer said. "Commander Virith was a high-ranking military officer. She might be operating under orders to exploit your connection to her." Ambassador Morgan shook her head. "I've read the message several times. The language patterns, the personal details, the willingness to admit negative consequences from her own side. This doesn't read like an intelligence operation to me. It reads like someone genuinely trying to reach out." Captain Stone sat back in his chair. "The question is what we do about it. This could be a remarkable opportunity or a catastrophic security breach, possibly both. What do you think, Sergeant?" Ambassador Morgan asked. "You've met Commander Virith. You've looked her in the eyes. Do you believe she's sincere?" Kyle thought about Virith pressing her face against the force field, watching as he was carried away bloody and unconscious. He thought about her declaration of Kethva, done publicly despite knowing it would bring her trouble. He thought about the pendant she had given him, a family treasure that meant something to her people. "I think she's telling the truth," Kyle said slowly. "I think she's tired of the war and looking for a way out, same as a lot of us." The room was silent for a moment. "If we allow this," Stone said, "it will be under strict conditions. Every communication will be monitored and analyzed. Intelligence will read everything before you do. You'll have handlers and oversight at every step." "I understand, sir." Ambassador Morgan nodded approvingly. "The potential intelligence value alone makes this worth pursuing. But beyond that, if there's even a small chance this could lead to real dialogue between our species, we have to take it." Palmer looked less convinced, but she didn't object. "We'll need to establish protocols, security measures, and Sergeant Bennett will need training on what information can be shared and what absolutely cannot. Agreed, Stone said. Then he looked at Kyle. This is completely voluntary, Sergeant. You can refuse this assignment and no one will think less of you. Your duty has already gone far beyond what anyone could expect. Kyle thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I'll do it, sir. If there's any chance we can end this war, we have to try. Over the next several days, Kyle worked with the intelligence and diplomatic teams to compose a response. They helped him craft careful language that was honest but didn't reveal classified information. Kyle told Virith he would engage in dialogue with her, but made clear he was doing so with his command's knowledge and approval. He asked her direct questions. Why did her people start the war? What did they hope to gain? What would it take for peace? When the message was sent through the same encrypted back channels, Kyle felt a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. He was about to have a conversation with an enemy commander, a dialogue that could lead to peace or disaster or nothing at all. The response came 3 days later. It was longer than the first message, much longer. Virith wrote about Zintharian history, how their homeworld had become overcrowded and their colonies strained for resources. She described the Zintharian expansion into new territories and their first contact with humans, which had gone badly due to misunderstandings on both sides. She wrote about her own experiences in the war, the battles she had fought, the humans she had killed, the nightmares that followed. She admitted to actions she was not proud of, moments where fear and anger had overcome honor. But mostly, she wrote about chicks, about wanting a future where her child didn't have to be a warrior, about hoping that someday Zintharians and humans could coexist peacefully, maybe even cooperate. Kyle read the message alone in his quarters, feeling something shift in his understanding of the war. Virith wasn't a monster. She was a soldier doing her duty, same as him. She had been hurt by the war, same as him. And she wanted it to end, same as him. He composed his own response, sharing carefully selected details about human motivations for the war. 6 months after the first message from Virith, Kyle's life had transformed in ways he never imagined. He was no longer just a Marine sergeant doing guard duty. He had become a bridge between two species at war, and that bridge was carrying more traffic than anyone expected. The correspondence with Virith had evolved far beyond simple information exchange. They wrote to each other almost daily now, and the messages had grown deeply personal. Virith shared Zintharian poetry with him, complex clicking patterns that somehow conveyed beauty when translated. Kyle introduced her to human music, sending recordings of everything from classical symphonies to modern rock, curious what an alien mind would make of human art. Virith found human music fascinating. She wrote that Zintharians had their own musical traditions based on rhythmic clicking and humming, but the concept of instruments creating sound was foreign to them. She especially liked piano music, saying the patterns reminded her of rain on her homeworld. Kyle learned about Zintharian family structures, which were more complex than human ones. Chicks, it turned out, had 3 parents in the Zintharian system, not 2. Virith was the birth mother, but there was also a genetic father and a guardian parent who helped raise offspring communally. It was strange to Kyle, but no stranger than humans probably seemed to Virith. They discussed philosophy and ethics, discovering surprising common ground. Both species valued honor, though they defined it differently. Both cherished their young and feared for their future. Both had individuals who wanted peace and individuals who only wanted victory. The intelligence value proved genuine and substantial. Through their conversations, human analysts gained insights into Zintharian military thinking, cultural values, and political divisions. There were moderate factions within Zintharian society who were tired of the war, just like there were moderates on the human side. One evening, Kyle was composing another message to Virith in his quarters, when Captain Stone visited him personally. The captain rarely came to crew quarters, so this was significant. "Sergeant Bennett," Stone said, taking the chair Kyle offered, "I have a proposal that comes from the highest levels of military command and civilian government. It's irregular, possibly dangerous, but potentially groundbreaking." Kyle set down his tablet. "I'm listening, sir." "Your correspondence with Commander Virith has proven valuable. More than that, it's revealed something important. There are Xantharians who want peace, and they're looking for a way to make contact with humans who feel the same way. Commander Vireth has backing from moderate factions within her government. She's not acting alone. I suspected as much, Kyle said. Some of her messages mention conversations with others, though she's careful not to reveal names or details. Stone nodded. We want to arrange a face-to-face meeting, you and Vireth, along with diplomatic teams from both sides. Not official peace negotiations, but exploratory talks. A proof of concept that humans and Xantharians can sit in the same room and discuss peace seriously. Kyle's heart raced. Where would this meeting happen? Sanctuary Station, same as the prisoner exchange. Neutral territory with security provided by the station itself. Ambassador Patricia Morgan would lead our delegation. Vireth has indicated she would bring someone called Selkith, who appears to be a Xantharian diplomat. When? 2 months from now if both sides can arrange it. The logistics are complex and both governments want plausible deniability if it fails. This will be unofficial, quiet, and if it goes wrong, both sides will deny it ever happened. Kyle understood. If the meeting was a disaster, or worse, if it was an ambush, everyone involved would be disavowed. But if it succeeded, if even small progress was made, it could open a path to real peace. I'll do it, Kyle said without hesitation. I thought you might, Stone replied with a slight smile. You'll undergo intensive diplomatic training over the next 2 months. Ambassador Morgan will work with you personally. You need to understand negotiation tactics, cultural protocols, and most importantly, what information can and cannot be shared. Kyle spent the next 8 weeks preparing. Ambassador Morgan proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but demanding. She taught him how to read body language, though she admitted that Xantharian body language might be completely different. She taught him negotiation techniques, how to find common ground, how to recognize manipulation. Through it all, Kyle continued his correspondence with Vireth. He told her about the preparations, though he was careful not to reveal specific security details. She wrote back with her own preparations, mentioning that she was studying human diplomatic protocols and trying to learn more about human facial expressions. One message from Vireth contained something that made Kyle pause and read it several times. She wrote about how their correspondence had changed her perspective on everything. She found herself thinking about his messages throughout her day. She looked forward to his responses with what she described as eager anticipation. She admitted that she felt a connection to him that went beyond Kethva, beyond political alliance, into something she didn't have words for in either language. Kyle sat staring at that message for a long time. Then carefully, honestly, he composed his response. He told her he felt the same way. That somewhere in their months of correspondence, his feelings had evolved into something he hadn't expected. He looked forward to her messages like he looked forward to nothing else. He thought about her perspective when making decisions. He wondered what she would say about the events of his day. He stopped short of using the word love, because he wasn't sure that word applied across species. But whatever it was he felt, it was powerful and growing stronger. Vireth's response came faster than usual. She wrote that Xantharians had a concept called soul bonding that occurred between individuals whose minds resonated on a deep level. It was rare even among Xantharians and unheard of across species, but she believed that something like soul bonding was happening between them. The realization both thrilled and terrified Kyle. He was developing feelings for an alien from an enemy species. It seemed impossible, maybe even wrong, but it also felt more real than anything he had experienced. The day finally arrived for the journey to Sanctuary Station. Kyle boarded a diplomatic transport with Ambassador Morgan, Captain Stone, and a security detail. The trip would take 3 days through hyperspace. During the journey, Kyle reviewed everything he had learned. He memorized key points about Xantharian culture. He practiced diplomatic phrases. He tried to imagine what it would be like to see Vireth again after months of only written communication. When they docked at Sanctuary Station, Kyle felt his nerves threatening to overwhelm him. This was it. Everything that had started with him protecting a child from a shock prod had led to this moment. The meeting location was one of the station's garden biodomes, a place where plants from multiple worlds grew together in carefully balanced ecosystem. It was chosen specifically for its symbolism, different species coexisting peacefully. Kyle entered the garden with Ambassador Morgan and Captain Stone flanking him. Security personnel maintained a careful distance, visible but not intrusive. Virith was already there. She stood near a small fountain, Chicks at her side. The young Zintharian had grown noticeably in the months since Kyle had seen them. Chicks was taller now, the soft plates hardening into proper armor, looking less like a child and more like a young adult. The moment Virith and Kyle made eye contact, everything else seemed to fade away. Kyle walked forward, keenly aware that dozens of eyes were watching this first interaction. "Commander Virith," he said formally, including the proper Zintharian gesture of respect that Ambassador Morgan had taught him. "Kyle Bennett," Virith replied in English that had improved dramatically since their last meeting. "You honor your word. I am pleased to see you again." "The pleasure is mine," Kyle said, meaning every word. Chicks rushed forward before anyone could stop them, wrapping arms around Kyle in an enthusiastic hug. "Friend Kyle, I missed you. Did you get my drawings? I've been practicing human art." Kyle hugged back, laughing. "I did get them. They're beautiful. You're very talented." The ice broken by a child's enthusiasm, the adults began the real work. They moved to a prepared area where chairs and tables had been set up for both species. Ambassador Morgan took the lead for the humans, while a tall Zintharian named Selkith spoke for their side. For 3 days they talked, about grievances and misunderstandings, about resources and territory, about the incidents that had escalated tensions into full war. Ambassador Morgan proved skilled at finding common ground, and Selkith seemed equally committed to finding solutions. But the real breakthroughs happened during breaks when Kyle and Virith walked the garden paths together. They talked about their hopes for the process, their fears of failure, their dreams of what peace might look like. On the final evening of the meeting, as Sanctuary Station's artificial sun set in the biodome's simulated sky, Kyle and Virith stood at an observation window overlooking the stars. Their security details were at a respectful distance. Chicks had fallen asleep in a rest area, exhausted from 3 days of excitement. "Kyle," Virith said quietly, using his first name without the formal surname for the first time. "I must tell you something that troubles me." Kyle turned to face her. "What is it?" 3 months after the meetings at Sanctuary Station, the preliminary framework for peace discussions had been presented to both governments. It was not a treaty, not even close to one, but it was more progress toward peace than 15 years of war had produced. Both sides agreed to formal negotiations, though the timeline remained unclear and the obstacles were enormous. Kyle had been officially reassigned from the Starbound Horizon to diplomatic service. He worked directly with Ambassador Patricia Morgan now, serving as a cultural liaison between human and Zintharian delegations. It was strange going from military service to diplomacy, but Kyle found the work meaningful in ways that combat never had been. His correspondence with Virith continued, now even more frequent and personal. They had stopped pretending their relationship was purely professional. Both acknowledged feelings that went beyond friendship, though neither was quite sure what to call a romantic connection between different species. Virith wrote about Zintharian concepts of partnership and bonding. She explained that her people formed deep emotional connections that were not necessarily based on physical attraction, but on mental and spiritual resonance. Two individuals whose thoughts harmonized, whose values aligned, whose presence brought joy to each other. These could become bonded mates regardless of other factors. Kyle researched human-alien relationships in history. They were rare but not unheard of. Since humanity had begun encountering other intelligent species, there had been occasional partnerships between humans and aliens. Most were viewed with curiosity or mild disapproval, but they were legal and recognized under interspecies law. But a relationship between a human and a Zintharian, between members of species actively at war, was different. It was politically explosive and potentially dangerous for both of them. The danger became clear when Kyle started receiving threats. Messages arrived through various channels, some anonymous and some signed by nationalist groups. They called him a traitor, a race traitor specifically, They said he was betraying humanity by caring for an alien enemy. Some threats were vague. Others were specific and graphic. Security was increased around Kyle. He could no longer move freely without guards. His family back on Earth received similar threats. His sister Claire had to be assigned protection at her university after protesters showed up demanding her brother be court-martialed for treason. Virith faced even worse consequences. She wrote to Kyle about formal challenges to her honor from hardline Xantharian military factions. In traditional Xantharian culture, warriors could challenge others to ritual combat to settle disputes about honor. Virith had refused these challenges on the grounds that Keithva superseded tribal warrior codes, but her refusals made her a pariah among traditional elements. Her extended family faced social exclusion. Her genetic father disowned her publicly, declaring that she had brought shame upon their lineage. Only her guardian parent stood by her, and even that support came at great personal cost. Despite the opposition, the formal peace negotiations began. A permanent diplomatic facility was established on Sanctuary Station, specifically for humans and Therian talks. Kyle was assigned there as part of the human delegation. Virith held a similar position on the Xantharian side. They worked together openly now. Their cooperation was becoming known among both populations. To some, they were symbols of hope, proof that peace was possible. To others, they were symbols of betrayal and weakness. One night, Kyle was working late in his quarters on Sanctuary Station, reviewing diplomatic briefing documents, when his security alert activated. The system was indicating unusual movement in the corridors near Vireth's residential section. Kyle immediately contacted station security, then made a decision that was probably foolish but felt necessary. He ran toward Vireth's quarters. He arrived to find chaos. Two Xantharian warriors, both wearing civilian clothes but clearly military in their bearing, had breached Vireth's door. Station security was still minutes away. Kyle could hear Chix's distressed clicking from inside. Kyle didn't have a weapon. He had only his training and the desperate need to protect someone he cared about. He charged through the broken door and saw Vireth fighting off both attackers while Chix was trying to get into a panic room. The assassins were skilled warriors, and Vireth was unarmed. She was holding them back through sheer ferocity, but she was taking damage. One of her arms hung uselessly, the joint shattered by a blow. Kyle grabbed a piece of the broken door and swung it at the nearest assassin. The improvised weapon connected with the warrior's head, staggering them. The second assassin turned toward Kyle, mandibles clicking in what might have been laughter at the foolish human who brought furniture to a fight. The warrior's strike was blindingly fast. Kyle barely dodged, feeling the wind of the blow pass his face. He wasn't going to survive a direct fight with a Xantharian warrior. He knew that. But he needed to buy time for security to arrive. He kept moving, dodging and blocking as best he could, using furniture as shields and weapons. A chair broke across his opponent's thorax. A table became a barrier that bought him 3 precious seconds. The assassin was toying with him now, clearly amused by the human's desperate attempts at defense. But those seconds mattered. Each second was one closer to help arriving. Then the warrior grew bored with the game. A strike connected with Kyle's ribs, the same ribs that had been broken months before. Kyle felt them crack again, the pain so intense that his vision went white. He collapsed, unable to breathe. The assassin raised a blade for a killing strike. Kyle couldn't move, couldn't defend himself. This was it. But Virith was there suddenly, throwing herself between Kyle and the blade despite her own injuries. The weapon meant for Kyle struck her instead, cutting deep into her shoulder plating. The sound Virith made was unlike anything Kyle had heard before, a shriek that combined pain and fury and protective rage. She struck back with her remaining good arms, fighting with a savageness born of desperation. Station security burst through the door at that moment, weapons raised. The assassins tried to fight their way out but were quickly surrounded and overwhelmed. One was killed in the firefight. The other was captured alive. Kyle lay on the floor, struggling to breathe through broken ribs. Virith collapsed beside him, green blood pooling from her wounds. Chix emerged from the panic room, saw both of them injured, and let out a wail of distress. Medics arrived within minutes. Both Kyle and Virith were rushed to the station's medical facility. The doctors worked frantically, humans treating a Xantharian while Xantharian medical staff attended to Kyle. Everyone united in the simple goal of saving lives. Kyle woke up 12 hours later with his ribs wrapped and repaired again. The first thing he asked about was Vereth. She's alive, the human doctor told him. The wound was serious but not fatal. She'll recover, though she's lost the use of one arm permanently. The damage to the joint was too severe to repair completely. Kyle insisted on seeing her. The doctors initially refused, saying he needed rest. But when Kyle threatened to get up and walk there himself, broken ribs be damned, they reluctantly allowed it. Vereth's room was heavily guarded now, with both human and Xantharian security personnel standing watch. Kyle was wheeled in on a chair, unable to walk without help. Vereth was awake, her compound eyes tracking his arrival. One of her forearms was bound tightly against her body, the joint wrapped in healing bandages. But she was alive and aware. "You should not be here," she said in English that was tired but clear. "You should be resting." "Same to you," Kyle replied. "You threw yourself in front of a blade for me. You threw yourself in front of assassins for me. This seems to be a pattern with us." Despite everything, Kyle laughed, then winced as his ribs protested. "We're either very brave or very stupid." "Perhaps both," Vereth said. Her good arms reached toward him and Kyle took her hand. Her scales were warm against his skin. Chix was in the room too, curled up in a corner looking smaller and more frightened than Kyle had seen since that first day in the prisoner hold. The young Xantharian looked at Kyle with wide eyes. "You came when we needed help," Chix said quietly. "Again, you keep saving us." "That's what family does," Kyle said, surprising himself with the words. But they felt right. Vereth's eyes seemed to brighten at that. "Family," she repeated. "Yes. That is what we have become, I think." Over the following days, the assassination attempt became major news on both human and Xantharian worlds. The captured assassin revealed under interrogation that they belonged to a Xantharian extremist faction, opposed to any peace with humans. They had specifically targeted Vereth because her relationship with Kyle symbolized everything they hated about the peace process. But the attack had an unexpected effect. Public opinion on both sides shifted. Citizens watched footage of a human and Xantharian protecting each other at great personal cost, and many began questioning whether the war was worth continuing. If even individuals from opposing species could care for each other enough to risk death, perhaps peace deserved a real chance. Messages of support flooded in from both human and Xantharian populations. Not everyone approved. There were still many who saw any friendship with the enemy as betrayal. But enough people were moved that political leaders took notice. The peace negotiations accelerated, both governments seeing the public. The news of Kyle and Vereth's bonding spread through both human and Xantharian space like wildfire. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some celebrated it as the ultimate symbol of peace between their species. Others condemned it as an abomination that violated the natural order. Kyle's parents sent a message from Earth. His mother was concerned but supportive, saying she just wanted him to be happy. His father was more skeptical, questioning whether this was real love or some kind of political stunt. But both promised to stand by him, which was more than many couples in their situation received from their families. Vereth's guardian parent sent formal approval through traditional Xantharian channels, recognizing the threefold promise as legitimate and binding. Her genetic father remained silent, his disownment standing. The silence hurt Vereth more than outright rejection would have, but she tried not to show it. The formal bonding ceremony was scheduled to take place after the peace treaty signing, which was now set for 6 weeks away. The negotiations had accelerated dramatically following the assassination attempt. Both sides were motivated to finalize an agreement before more extremists could derail the process. Kyle and Vereth continued their work as cultural liaisons, but now they did so as an openly bonded couple. They lived together in shared quarters on Sanctuary Station, learning to navigate the practical challenges of an interspecies relationship. There were many challenges. Xantharians had different sleep cycles than humans, active for 18 hours and dormant for 8, offset from Kyle's natural rhythm. Their dietary needs were completely different, requiring separate food preparation areas. The temperature preferences varied too. Xantharians comfortable in warmth that Kyle found stifling, but they made it work. Kyle adjusted his schedule gradually. They found a compromised temperature for their quarters. They learned each other's needs and habits with patience and humor. Chix adapted most easily of all. The young Xantharian now had two parent figures from different species and seemed to find that perfectly normal. Chicks attended a new integrated school on Sanctuary Station, where human and Xantharian children learned together, one of several pilot programs designed to build understanding between the species. Kyle found himself becoming a parent figure to Chicks in ways he never expected. He helped with homework, attended school events, and learned to tell when Chicks was upset, even though Xantharian emotional expressions were subtle to human eyes. Virith taught him the signs, the angle of mandibles, the speed of clicking sounds, the way Chicks' plating shifted color slightly with mood. The peace negotiations continued through all of this. Ambassador Patricia Morgan led the human delegation with skill and patience. Selketh, the Xantharian diplomat, proved equally capable. Together with dozens of other negotiators from both sides, they worked through centuries of grievances and decades of active warfare. Territory was the biggest sticking point. Both species had colonies in disputed systems. Both had spilled blood claiming those worlds. Neither wanted to simply give up what they had fought for. Kyle and Vireth helped bridge the gap by proposing joint colonies, worlds where both species would settle together under shared governance. It was radical, perhaps impossible, but the negotiators agreed to include the concept in the treaty as an experiment. Resources were easier to resolve. Both species needed different things from the same systems. Xantharians required minerals that humans had little use for. Humans needed water-rich moons that Xantharians found uninhabitable. Trade agreements could turn competition into cooperation. The hardest issue was justice. Both sides had committed atrocities during the war. Both demanded accountability for war crimes, but neither wanted their own leaders prosecuted while forgiving enemy commanders. The compromise was a joint tribunal with judges from both species and neutral third parties from other alien races. It would investigate the worst crimes from both sides and render verdicts based on interspecies law. Not everyone would be happy with the results, but it was better than letting crimes go unanswered or continuing the war indefinitely. As the treaty took shape, opposition from hardliners on both sides intensified. Nationalist groups organized protests outside Sanctuary Station. Extremist messages flooded communication networks, calling for the negotiations to fail and the war to continue. Kyle received daily death threats now. So did Virith. Their security details were increased to the point where they couldn't move anywhere without armed guards. Chicks' school had to implement strict security protocols after a threat was called in against the integrated students. The stress was enormous. Kyle found himself having trouble sleeping, waking from nightmares where assassins got past security and hurt Vireth or Chicks. Vireth became more withdrawn, her usually sharp wit dulled by constant vigilance. One particularly bad night, Kyle woke from a nightmare to find Virith sitting by the window looking out at the stars. Her injured arm, still healing and never to fully recover, was cradled against her body. "Can't sleep either?" Kyle asked, joining her at the window. "I keep thinking about the price of peace," Vireth said quietly. "How many more will try to kill us before this is over? How many innocents will be hurt by those who prefer war to understanding?" Kyle took her hand with his own. "I don't know, but I know that what we're doing matters. Every day the negotiations continue, fewer soldiers die in combat. Every day that passes brings us closer to a future where Chicks doesn't have to fight." "Is it selfish," Vireth asked, "to want a future for my child more than I want honor among my people?" "That's not selfish. That's being a good parent." They sat together in silence for a while, watching ships come and go from the station. Each ship represented lives, stories, people trying to survive in a universe that felt dangerous and uncertain. "Tell me about your homeworld," Kyle said, wanting to distract Vireth from dark thoughts. "You've mentioned it in messages, but I want to hear more." Vireth's posture relaxed slightly as she began describing her birth world. She spoke of crystal forests that caught sunlight and made rainbows dance across the ground. She described vast underground colonies where Xantharians built their cities, preferring the safety and coolness of the depths. She told Kyle about her childhood, learning to hunt in the forest, studying military tactics in preparation for mandatory service, meeting her future mates in the communal raising centers where all young Xantharians were educated together. "I always knew I would be a warrior," Virith said. "From the time I was Chicks' age, it was understood. My family had a proud military tradition. I never questioned it. Do you regret it?" Kyle asked. "The military life? I regret the killing, Vareth said honestly. I regret not questioning orders sooner. But I do not regret the skills I learned or the discipline that service taught me. And I do not regret where that path led me because it led to you. Kyle squeezed her hand. Tell me about your mates, the ones who are Chix's other parents. Virith was quiet for a moment. Kelth was my genetic mate, the father of Chix. He died 2 years ago in a battle with human forces. Sorveth is Chix's guardian parent, the one who still supports my choices. Sorveth lives on our homeworld now, caring for elderly members of our family group. We maintain communication, but the distance is difficult. I'm sorry about Kelth, Kyle said. It must be hard raising Chix without him. It is. But Xantharian family structures are flexible for exactly this reason. War claims many lives. Children need stability. Sorveth and I provide what Chix needs, even from a distance. And now Chix has you as well. The conversation drifted to other topics. Kyle told Vareth about Earth, about oceans that covered most of the planet, about weather and seasons and the diversity of human cultures. Virith was fascinated by the concept of rain, which her desert homeworld rarely experienced. As dawn approached on Sanctuary Station's artificial cycle, they finally felt tired enough to sleep. They returned to bed, curled together in a way that accommodated both human and Xantharian anatomy, and found rest in each other's presence. The weeks passed in a blur of diplomatic sessions, security briefings, and stolen moments of peace. The treaty grew longer and more detailed as negotiators worked through every possible contingency. Trade routes were mapped. Border zones were defined. Cultural exchange programs were outlined. Kyle and Virith became the faces of these exchange programs. They recorded messages that were broadcast to both populations, explaining the treaty terms in accessible language. They answered questions from citizens who were curious or skeptical or outright hostile. Not everyone was convinced. Polls showed populations divided almost evenly on both sides. Roughly half of humans supported the treaty, seeing it as a chance to end a costly war. The other half viewed it as surrender or weakness. Xantharian polling showed similar splits, but enough people on both sides wanted peace that political leaders committed to moving forward. The treaty,